Today we're going to be taking a look on how to color correct for beginners. Today we're going to be looking at this live worship session sent by my friend Francis Nudo from EXP Church. So today we're going to be looking at this footage and we're going to be color correcting it and basically taking it from a very flat image and bringing it back to life. Starting off in the beginning, we're going to have to add exposure. So that's one of the first things when you're wanting to fix your footage is correct the exposure. So let's open up a way to reference the exposure in the video. So we're going to have to go to video scopes. And here we have a waveform monitor. So basically anything over 100 is completely white, blown out, no information. So you should, rule of thumb, you shouldn't have any visual information here. Anything under 0 is basically pitch black. There is nothing there. So you should also not have any shadows down here. So basically this is measured in shadows, midtones, highlights, and completely white blown out information. We're gonna have to find a way to mess around with the colors. So if we click the little button right here, this is a color inspector. So this takes us to a few different options. So we're going to want to start off with exposure and we're going to want to adjust exposure. So good rule of thumb for me is I literally bring up my highlights. So the way this works is that the ones on the right are highlights, the ones in the middle are midtones, and the ones on the left are kind of like shadows. So if you work with EQs, basically similar thing, bass, midtones, highlights, lows is basically the darks, same kind of thing. So we're going to want to raise up the highlights as close as we can to almost touch 100. Clipping is basically when you're passing over 100, you lose all your information. You don't want to clip. You want everything in the video to have detail and information. If you clip, there's literally going to be nothing there. As you see here, we're clipping and we start losing information in the shadows and in the midtones, and we just literally start making a mess. So we're not going to want to go crazy. I'd say right there's a good starting point, and this is for the highlights. So we're basically bringing it from being super crushed and flat where there's no information, and basically going to open it up and start bringing in some highlights. In this case, there's a white wall, so it needs to be white. So obviously we're going to bring it up, but it depends on your shot where you're kind of going for as well. I'd say as long as you don't pass 100 and there's white detail there, you should be fine. Basically use both of them as a reference. You don't want to just look at one the whole time. Use both. You can't just trust this because our eyes sometimes think things look good and they don't, and so after a while you're like, oh my god, my video looks horrible. Anyway, so now let's touch the shadows. So there isn't anything that's completely black besides these lights down here that should be that dark. So I'd say as long as we're around there, you see I'm not even going all the way down to 0. You could go down there, but I don't feel like there's a need to add that much adjustment. So now what we basically did, we added some contrast to our footage. We added more highlights and we added a little bit more shadows. So now the next thing we have to keep in mind is the midtones. So basically what sits in the midtones is usually skin tones. So now what we're going to do to see where her skin tones are sitting, we're going to want to use a mask. Let's search for a mask. So down here there's a little effects browser. So you basically look, all the things I'm doing come with Final Cut. So you should have these tools in any video program that you use. All right, so let's draw a mask, drop it in, and you basically want to just do a rough little outline of her face. Alrighty, perfect. As you see here, we're able to see where her skin tone exposure is sitting. If you take a quick look over here, it's basically passing a little bit over 75, and that's the highest point. Usually with skin tones, there's a lot of debate on it. You're going to want to keep it around 60 to 70 for white skin tones. Darker skin tones, you can be around 40 to 60. So in this case, I'm going to want to lower the midtones a little tiny bit. So we go back to our exposure, and now we're going to mess with the midtones. And I'm going to bring it down a little tiny bit. Just add a little bit more detail around there. So I literally did nothing, -1. We're obviously going to take off this mask for now. If we see a little before and after. Now we set our exposure. So to me, that looks a lot brighter. It pops out 1,000 times more. So now something that we're going to have to tackle is white balance. So white balance is one of those things that when you're starting out, you're not going to get it right. your eyes are not going to be able to see, and your eyes are going to lie to you. So you're going to want to be careful, because you're going to think whites are white. And if you're looking at this image and this white looks completely white to you, then I'm sorry to say that it's not white. We're going to basically adjust the white balance of this. A great way to notice that the white balance is off is, there's a few different ways, but one of the ways that I like to check is by the same way we had the mask drawn. We're basically going to go to another tool called our vector scope. So it's very hard to see, but there's a little line here. So in my case, if you're not able to really see the lines and the information, what you could do is boost up the image size. We're going to put it back later. We're just using this for a one-time thing to actually see the information. So we're just literally blasting it up in the transform. Alrighty, so now I made it a lot bigger so you can actually see what is going on. So the line right here is basically a skin tone line. It doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, what color you are, any skin tone should always sit in this line right here. It doesn't matter where you're from, every skin tone. This is basically a guide to show you where skin tones should sit. And if your white balance is off, it's going to throw off your skin tones. So as we see here, they're kind of pushed towards green, a little bit orangey, a lot of orange actually. So we're going to want to adjust that. So we're going to go over here to the color inspector, and we're going to add a color wheel. And after we add the color wheel, we're going to mess with the temperature. And while we're going to push it left, we're going to be adding a little bit of blue, which is basically going to push this back into the flesh tone, the skin tone line. So we're going to slowly move it until we're sitting in the line. Perfect. Let's go back to our original image. So let's zoom out, and now we can remove the mask, and let's go back to fit. So now we've basically corrected the white balance. To any normal person, it looked normal, right? Like, I don't think anyone would have been able to tell the difference. So the whites weren't set at the correct white balance. So now that we made them actually white, now the skin tones are sitting where they need to be. So it basically fixes that. We fixed the exposure. So right here with the color board, we did a exposure fix. So we brought it back and added some contrast. Right here, we fixed our white balance, bringing it from this very yellow color back to regular white, or where it should be. So the walls actually look white now, and the skin tones are sitting where they need to be. So now we can start messing around with saturation. So we're going to want to zoom in a little bit and see here. All right, we're going to use our buddy here. All right, so go ahead and add a new color board. And now we're going to add some saturation in the midtones. So you have to be very careful, because it's very easy to oversaturate your footage, especially when you're starting off. So a little trick of mine for shadows, I like to go -5 and just take off a little bit of saturation, because I feel like in the shadows, there shouldn't be a lot of color anyways. I think it's okay to take off a little bit of saturation. And in the midtones, we're basically going to add a little bit of saturation, quite a bit here, until we start seeing that image pop out and look natural. Obviously we go crazy, but that looks way too horrible. So bring it down a little bit. To me, that looks great. And obviously highlights, we're going to want to bring a little bit of saturation as well. And we have to make sure we're not going crazy here. And I'd say even dropping down a little bit. And let's look at the whole image here. So a few things when we're adding saturation. I know that for sure the plant's going to start popping out, the guitar, the oranges, her pants are going to start coming out. So let's see a little bit before and after. Even here, you're able to see the difference where it's like opening up the image. I'd say saturation is very subjective. I don't really have any rules on how to measure it. Just be careful. Just make sure no one looks like an orange. Just watch out for any skin tones. Skin tones are especially important when adding saturation. You don't want anyone to look like an orange. So I feel like in this case, everyone still looks natural. So we see our before and after with the saturation. This is what we get. So now we go back to our complete effects panel here. We're able to see everything we did. And now we can delete that draw mask that we're using to reference our our skin tones. So if we do our before and after, we started with this, and now we're down with this. Now you're able to start doing things like applying LUTs. The funny thing is that people, when they're starting off, the first thing they want to do is apply a LUT to their footage. And if you don't know what a LUT is, a LUT basically is colors being manipulated in your footage to add different looks, basically like an Instagram filter. But the issue is that people start adding LUTs as soon as they get their footage. They just start throwing LUTs on there, and they think LUTs don't work. And the reason is because you need to color correct your footage before you add any type of LUT on your footage. And your LUTs are basically expecting you to have correct exposure, correct white balance. But if you don't have those things nailed down, then your footage is not going to look good. So now we can go ahead and add a LUT. So now you could start adding some stylized footage. Right here, I just added a little Joker LUT made. It's kind of like a vintagey, kind of a creamy retro LUT, kind of emulates some older type of cameras. And now we get kind of that greenish look in the midtones, a little bit of yellow in the highlights. If you guys are interested in this LUT, let me know. I haven't released it. But now it just gives that different type of feeling. And one thing to note, you're never going to want to add your LUT 100%. When you add it over 50%, or in this case 0.51, it ends up being way too much. So I'd say anywhere under 0 to 50 to 60%, you should be good. Anywhere more, then watch out and stay away from it. So I have a few different LUTs here. So from a few different downloads I've gotten. So it depends on the look you want, and now you can really start tweaking. And now that you have your LUT, you can still go ahead and make some adjustments. If you notice that your exposure, you don't want that much, you want a little bit, your midtones to be a little bit darker. Now you're able to change and transform your footage. So basically we went from this to that. Once again, guys, my name is Roberto Diaz. If you guys have any questions, please let me know down in the comments section down below. Please make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. If you guys are interested in more videos like this, please let me know. Thank you, guys.